Og det er ikke hvilken som helst kvinne vi skal høre som neste foredragsholder. Design a landscape is about connecting the body, the soul and the mind to the land itself. Neste foredragsholder Kathryn Gustavsson. As an international acclaimed landscape architect, she's known for creating distinguished sculptural landscapes which engage a fundamentally human level. Kathryn is an honorary fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architecture and honorary royal designer for industry member and medalist for the French Academy of Architecture as well. Hun altså partner av Gustavsson og Porter og Bowman, og har verdenskjente prosjekter bak seg. En av de The Garden of the Imagination i Frankrike, minnefontenen til prinsesse Diana i Hyde Park i London, og plassene mange. Jeg vet hun elsker hagen sin, og jeg gleder meg til å høre henne snakke. The change in the definition of beauty.
Okay, great. Hi. Sorry I don't speak Norwegian. Sometimes I'm not even sure I speak English, but here we go. I find it fascinating how we define beauty, and I think that beauty is something that is very personal, but is something extremely universal. And I like this quote by David Brooks because it puts beauty into context. It says that beauty is something that conquers the deadening aspects of routine. It educates your emotion and connects us to the eternal. It arouses your sentences, your thoughts, and your spirit. And then there's John Donahue book, Beauty, the Invisible Embrace. People feel alive in the presence of beautiful, for it meets the needs of our souls. Without beauty, the search for truth, desire for goodness, and love of order and unity would be sterile exploits. And so I think what's happening is that our definition of beauty changes. And we can see it through art, and we can see it through whether it's a Dutch still life painting, whether it's an impressionist painting or a contemporary art installation piece. They're all about fruit, they're all about something eternal, but each generation has a different cultural take on it. This is one of my favorite paintings by Matisse because it's so much about placing ourselves in a landscape and what we perceive as beauty. Here, this is classic landscape in that we are above, we dominate. We see into light, but we're protected. We see water, which is the nutriment of sources. And yet we have a pathway that takes us on to discovery. So the other Matisse I like very much is this one because it defines how we use water. And so we use water to take care of our goldfish, but we also use water as a way to reflect light into our houses, our homes, but we also use water as a way to transport things. And so and then there's the sky that produces water. So in this painting, there's this multiplicity of attitudes about water and how we live with it. Also notice there's a little plant by the fish that also needs water. And this is another Matisse about landscape and how we have these desire lines and how we understand things. So if you notice that in the center of the piece, there's this sky, meaning you know there's a valley beyond because there's nothing else holding on. And you see a pathway that turns, and then you see sun on the side of the planting. So you know that there's sun coming in. So, and you see a pathway that turns, so you want to go there. So I think these are all psychological parts of beauty that make us feel a desire to be here. This Monet is extremely interesting for me because it's about safety. It's about being in a field that is protected by a mountain. If you look at these two mouses on the left, they're very much about French cemeteries. So that's where your family has been put to rest. If you look on the right, this is very much about homestead. And then in the center are cows, which is about food. And so it's a safe place. It's a quiet, safe place where you want to be. So as we think about what is safe and what is welcoming, and how do we psychologically understand landscape and beauty as a way to create spaces for people as we change. So this is obviously a painting that talks about three different kinds of spaces. You have the foreground, medium ground, foreground. So the foreground is always where you're going to go in heaven, or like in a Turner to the far, far future. The midground is the context you live in, and the foreground is your personal life. And so understanding those different contexts in urban planning of what are those different pieces and why do we find certain things beautiful about certain areas. So you can see our front people here are on a nice grassy plain. They have a beautiful view. They have a place to play. They are protected. There's a stream of water. There's a bridge that gives them access. So there's a lot of complexities within this being a place that is desirable and safe. This is Stowe, 1730. I think it's one of the most modern landscapes in the world, in that you see where there's a part of what I call the desire line. You want to go to that point, but you can't just go there. You have to walk around and discover to get there. So again, that curved pathway of discovery, but knowing that there's something at the end you actually want to get to. So that's part of our perception of beauty. I think that there is really a point. Do we have an echo? Okay, I hope not. Where what I'm going to do is turn down my mic, my sound. Can you still hear me? Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. You'll tell me if not. I think that these pathways to what is aesthetic, and where in the picture on the left is really about the natural environment, and then on the right is about a more artistic environment. I think we're actually going more towards the picture on the left, but we still want to represent nature. So here is Yosemite waterfall. This is one of our projects, water coming through planting. It's much more sculptural, it's less natural, but it brings those things into play. There's sometimes with classical proportions that are very timeless. So on the right is the American Portrait Museum, and it has classical proportions and then very contemporary renditions of these pieces. But it's the classical that holds you and holds you within a calmness. Then culturally, what is that safe place? And so this is a jade piece, obviously, I believe it's Chinese, of the mountain is behind you, it's protecting you. The tree is giving you shade and anchoring you. But then when we go to something like this, which is Impressionist, it's very much the same thing, because you're protected within the rocks, you have the view beyond, you have the trees that protect, but our interpretation of beauty between one culture and next can be extremely different, but I think there's part of our souls that are the same. So I think what I'm going to talk about now is how do we a landscape and its environment, well, as we gain knowledge about the environment and landscape, our definition of beauty changes. And there are ways of helping people become more aware of the natural and man-made environments and how to ensure and enhance that there's a diversity of use of these environments. You'll see as I go along how that definition of beauty changes. And I think we're right in the crux of a huge shift on how we define beauty. This is a project I did quite a long time ago in Marseille, where this whole landscape was just ripped out by a freeway in the 60s. And in it, it's a natural landscape beyond. And they're digging a tunnel in Marseille, and they've got all this earth coming out. And one of the problems with this freeway, there's no stormwater management. So the water just gets impermeabilized, and then it is not at all controlled. So it goes into this huge flooding situation into streams that are nearby. So what we did is try to control the flooding and start controlling the stormwater management, but at the same time, teach people to understand that when you impermeabilize and you create these roads, you are actually affecting your natural environment to an extreme effect. So this is my quick sketch saying, okay, we're coming down a hill there. We have to create these walls to start holding up things and holding up water to contain it. And so this is a quick sketch where all of these are taking in water from the freeways, and then we have 2 stormwater basins that are collecting the water. And for me, it was a way of trying to teach people to learn about how much water comes off these freeways. And so I work in clay and then I do models, but you can see this is a series of concrete pylons. And this is one of the main basins of stormwater management. And as it fills up, these are on a horizontal level, but it goes down. So you start to see how much water raises up in this. And that's just another view of it. So coming into 3D, understanding how much volume of water, working with civil engineers, how much water we need to hold and how much we need to release. And then here are the columns. And so you can start to see the water levels of how they, sorry about that, as how those water levels are starting to mark. And people have since then said, oh my God, there's so much water in there. Where is it coming from? So it's part of our education of beauty. And then doing meadows, and that are meadows that are about pollination. They're meadows that are also about absorbing water and slowing it down. So this is the site before, and then a series of stone walls from the local stone that retain these pieces and also have this educative effect. So I think as we work and try to share our knowledge with people and share our knowledge with ourselves also and how we learn things, this is one of the very early projects that I did. But we change how we see things. So the lawn is just like a major thing. We all know it. And do we always have a lawn that's completely functional for events and still have a stormwater management? Having that type of lawn, this is the park in Amsterdam, we did Westergasfabriek, that kind of lawn has an impact about drainage, about a lot of things. So then having it be very much part of the program of place, but then having this whole ecological area that takes all that water and treats it as it moves through. So what do you find the most beautiful, right? So there we go back. You know, our change of our aesthetic is, well, yeah, I really like this, but I really like this. And so, and we're aesthetically moving as a culture. Is it going back to picturesque, or is it going towards ecology and towards insertion? So the thing that I've been working on lately is historical landscapes and how they adapt to the environment, because they're very, very special in that they have this cultural aspect. And we're going to talk about Washington, D.C., because it's a study that I'd been doing for quite a while, and it was part of a think tank with quite a few other landscape architects. So it was great. We're all in this together. We're all thinking sideways about how to solve this problem. So this is just our solution, but James Corner has a solution. You know, Gary has a solution. There's all sorts of people that have other solutions. So you can go on their websites and see what people have done. The site is this green area in here. So this is L'Enfant's plan, the original plan of Washington, D.C. And the mall comes along this axis. But what's important about this plan is you've got the Potomac River and the eastern branch. They are tidal. They come up from the Atlantic. And then during the construction of Washington, D.C., see these canals here? They were draining a marsh. And so L'Enfant built the Capitol in kind of the wrong place. But okay, it's there, it's historical, it's loved. And this is what it looks like today. So this is called the Tidal Basin here. The mall here, sorry, I got to go back, stretches. You can see my arrow, I hope. The Capitol is on the right. The mall is in the center with museum rows on either side. Washington Monument is also on a hill. The Capitol is on a hill. And then you have Lincoln also on a hill. And then you have the White House also on a hill outside of flooding. And as you see the Tidal Basin here, you have the Jefferson Memorial that is also on a hill. What you don't have is FDR Roosevelt Memorial is flush with the water, and so is Martin Luther King. So those are two very important memorials within the changing culture of the United States and the evolution of the culture. And then here you have these sort of baseball fields, which is obviously one of America's national sports. And so people come out and play baseball. And this body of water is called the Tidal Basin. And the way it functions is water is let in through inlets here, and then it's let out over on this far side to create a whole marina area for boats. And this is one of the most iconic places in Washington, D.C. It's culturally important. You don't just eliminate it. It's part of how the city and the nation identifies itself. So it's extremely important culturally, but environmentally, it's also very important. And this is the reflecting pool going to the end to Lincoln. And notice it's lower and there's berms on the side. That is about flooding. So when you're in DC, if you see the Washington Monument and the cherries, you know where you are. You are at the Tidal Basin. And the Tidal Basin is completely lined by Japanese cherries that were given by Japan. So it's, again, a diplomatic piece. It's a national piece. And it is very loved because it is extraordinary when the cherries bloom. And it draws people from all over the world. Wonderfully celebrated. And you watch the depth people have here between the edge and the bottom, and look at this floating boat restaurant. You can see the Tidal Basin is tidal. It moves up and down. And the cherry trees, it's very narrow now where you can walk. But during the day. It's a place people go. They go with their dogs. They go with their kids. You know, it's not just tourists. It's part of Washington, D.C.'s soul. This makes you really understand how fragile this ecology is, in that these are the floodgates that let you in and the gates out, train on either side, connecting to the other side of the river. It floods. It has flood every once in a while, but these are all the cherry trees. Now, cherry trees don't particularly like being flooded, and especially Prunus jadocensis and some of the other cherries. And if it's every, 5 years, okay, they can survive. It's every year now. And it's almost every day that the sea level has risen so much that there is no way these cherries are going to survive. They're dying all the time. And so there's this scramble of, do we save the cherries? How important are they culturally? What's our aesthetic? Do we not save the cherries? What do we do? This is also economic driver. It brings in a lot of tourist money. It's a complex socioeconomic problem and an environmental problem. And it's one of the reasons I love it. This is NOAA, one of our most important predictor of flooding. This is what NOAA is saying. You watch how that flooding increases every 20 years. And this is what's going to happen if we don't do anything. This is the Martin Luther King Memorial. In, I believe, 60 years, this is where the tidal level will be. We have to move the memorial. There's absolutely no way to protect it. We have to get it on higher ground. So this is the study that we worked on. It's called Tidal Basin Ideas Lab. So you can, Google it, find everybody else's projects that they did. I think there were 5 of us. Some very interesting projects, totally different approaches, but that was what it was about. So here you can see the floodgates coming in. Over on the right is the FDR Memorial. If you've never been, it is a Halpern. It's fantastically beautiful. And you have the Jefferson. So we base this on adaptive management, meaning you think you know the future, but you actually really don't know the future. So you've got to go with what you know. So you evaluate your risk. You understand that there's uncertainties. And this is the Idea Lab. You design, you establish goals, you try to predict outcomes, then you implement, then you go to stage 1, which is 2040, and you monitor the impacts. Then you move to stage 2 of design impact, comparing the assumptions to outcomes. You learn from it, you adjust, you shift your objectives, and then you start the circle again. There is no one answer. There is an evolution of answers. So the design evolves with climate change. And at the beginning, right now, we have a 3-foot a meter rise, sea level rise, than we had before. In 20 years, that's going to double. In 50 years, that's going to triple. And then by 90, it's 4 times. So these are the stages we're trying to deal with and evolve and understand the social cultural impact of what they mean. So as you can see in the Ideas Lab, it's here at stage 3, we incorporate the learning of stage 1 and 2 to see what do we modify and how do we move forward. So there's 2 things with water in this area. One is just tidal moving up, sea level rise. The other one is storm surge. And the storm surge is on your right, the sea level's on your left. So you can see that in stage 1, you may have a 3-foot level, but your storm surge is at 9. There's certain adaptive vegetation that can take in a storm surge. They're not going to die. but the constant level rise is totally a different environmental problem. So this shows stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and the blue you can see. So our tidal basin's up here. We have some flooding here. We have more flooding. You can see the reflection pool you saw before starts to flood. We have a dam up here. We have a higher ground here and there. Look what happens in stage 3. All what we call the government monumental core buildings start flooding. So that is, there's this decision. Do you protect the cultural landscape? Do you let it just go away? Do you move it? Do you try to protect it and still have an environmental landscape? We went for the last. This is if the annual flood surge of in 100 years, this is what it's going to look like. So look at these levels. Things are up plus 40, plus 10, and you're going to start to see this level of flood surge is 18 feet tall. And at the tide, everyday tide is at 12 from today, which is 3. So this is, we looked at how do we create infrastructure to protect the city and also create a natural environment. So it turns out there's a tunnel being dug underneath the river, and there's all this fill. So we're taking the fill and we're raising high plateaus up to that 18-foot mark, which is the top flood surge, and connecting it into the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and up to this higher ground that's here, and allowing flooding to actually happen along all the edges. So, but it means you have to change the aesthetics, and you're going to evolve with aesthetics. And I think it's one of the things I'm seeing more and more, that yes, I prefer the meadow to the mown lawn. Yes, I prefer the forest to the controlled bosque. And understanding how that aesthetic will change, and how do you bring people along with that aesthetic, and how do you make them understand that this, how do you have them be part of that choice and have it accessible? So we have 3 stages. This is stage 1, where we fix the floodgates. We have a controlled at 3 feet. So we stop the daily flooding, and we start doing earthworks, and we start creating a nursery for a native floodplain forest. Then stage 2, we take the nursery and we plant all the floodplain forest, and we create new circles of cherry trees, but on high ground. And you'll see the cherry trees pink are non-native, white are native. And you'll see slowly we change the non-native for the native that are more adaptable. And we start to expand the marshes, and we protect the FDR Memorial with a wall, and we move Martin Luther King to higher ground. Then stage 3, which is your highest, the pathway below now is a boardwalk. You have established marshes, you have event circles of cherries, and you have a new cherry walkway all the way on the top, all the way around, that allows you still to have that experience, but now your cherries are native. These are the marshes to build it. This is my old profile here. We need to put in amount of fill to recreate the marshes, because this was not created as a marsh, but there's some beautiful marshes in the Anacostia River that we have been using as our template. Then, so if you look at stage 1, we're on a walkway down below, and that we have a roadway up above, which is up here, which is, that's called Independence Avenue. The tidal gates are repaired. Step 2, we have to get a new pathway. We're talking 50 years from now, that we've got a new low pathway at 10 feet. We have high tide at 9 feet, we have new marshes in, we have the existing cherry trees, and we have new cherry trees. The pink is existing, the white is native. Then as we get to high tide, we're the highest level in 70 years, that pathway becomes a boardwalk over the marshes, and a new pathway at 14 feet is established. Now, 14 feet is 2 feet above the highest tide of 12 feet. So it's always a dry area. Notice our non-native cherries are basically disappearing because the environment is too wet for them. So this is a way of what I call adaptive aesthetics, where we start with one aesthetic and we move into another aesthetic, and it's because of our knowledge. We know this is better for the planet. We know it's something that we want to be part of, and so it's aesthetically better. That is what I find fascinating, and to have this floodplain forest reestablished, so you can see we still get flood surges at 18 feet, but this forest can take it. They're fine. But the high tide, they're not flooded permanently at any time. And so it's a strategy to reestablish this forest. And this forest is mostly lilodendron tiliferia. It's absolutely, they're like cathedral, like they're beautiful. And this is in Delaware. And so here, the clearing of the meadows, you see the meadows basically start being on high ground, the new pathway at the top. I think I'm running out of time. And the evolution of the clearing. So first, they don't have much around them. They have some prairie and some horticultural non-native cherries. And as you see, the non-native cherries disappear and the cherries take over, and the clearing in the meadow becomes a place for events. These are how the cherries evolve. You can see that you'll have a Prunus yetocensis, and it comes out to be a Prunus americana. Also, Cercis candescens comes in. You had Magnolia denuata. You don't really have magnolia here, but you have Cratagnus, Amelanchier, Conus florida, all of which are native. And they're all flowering. So it's not just one species, multiple species. So that's sort of where we are. We're creating new clearings. We're creating a new cherry walk, but it's a different kind of cherry walk and a new ecology in the forest. And you can see here just the works that it will take to do it. So I'll be really quick because you've seen it, but this shows you what strategically you do at each stage, whether it's doing land movement, your nursery, you're adding the first flood surge, you're getting in most of your marshes, you're starting to adaptive landscape, and then you're protecting what we call the cultural landscape. So all of this is saying, this is cultural landscape that we're going to protect from flooding. This is a natural landscape that we're going to create a native environment in, and they're both part of our world. And this is our stage 2. Remember, flooding is bigger than high tide. It goes in, it lasts 3 or 4 days, it comes out. This is FDR Memorial with a 3-foot wall that protects it, brings it up to that stage 3. And this is stage 3, the final aspect of this, and how it connects into and even protects this other peninsula area in the same way. That's your flood surge in stage 3 and 18 feet. So this is Martin Luther King in his new high plateau area, and he's directly talking to Jefferson, and he's also with the Washington Monument. And this is showing you the new boardwalks, the new marshes, and how those marshes are creating new habitat, and also how we're connecting to the river beyond. So this is pretty much, I think, the end of this talk. I think that we go from the past and we have history and continuity, We have our present, which is really about our humanity and how we unite and how do we work our future with ecology and diversity. And so I think it takes some very complex projects to make that happen. I like this because, you know, something may be straight, but it can still be poetic and mysterious. It's one of my favorite images. So that's what I have. I think I finished on time. So what do I do now? Stop sharing my screen, or can you take over? I didn't hear you. Hello?
Hello, Kathryn. Do you hear me?
Yes, now I do.
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm speechless. It's amazing. The way you cope with environmental problems and still put in the beauty and the ancient history of gardens. It's just amazing.
Thank you.
So thank you for a wonderful speech. I'm sure that there's lots of people in here that want to ask you some questions. They're quite educated people, this.
I should hope so.
Mitt mobilnummer, hvis ikke dere sitter liksom helt i foran her, kommer opp nå. Send melding, så skal jeg prøve å bring it on. Dere på blant de første rekkene her, så skal dere få egen mikrofon. Dere må jo ha noen spørsmål, gutter. Det er det råeste innenfor landskaps...
Hello, do you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful presentation. We are all very concerned with the future of our human environment. And I was wondering if you are optimistic. Do you think what we as landscape architects do can help us towards a future that is more sustainable? And do you think we will manage to do it in time?
There is no answer to that because we don't know. But at this point, for me, all you can do is try. And you need to apply. I try to apply as much as I can to the knowledge I have. And it's constantly, for me, a juggling of that safe place of what I knew and going into a future that I don't know. And trying to educate myself constantly to understand the new thinking and people who have done so much research, and how do you create groups together of people that come from different disciplines. It's not a one-person solve, right? It takes a community to really work it, and trying to get the water people, or the civil engineering people, or the cultural people, and get this synergy between. And also that adaptive learning is really important, because you start out with a hypothesis and then you rejudge, and then you keep moving that circle. And I think, of course, I'm very hopeful, but I tend to be a hopeful person. And there, you know, life is really just too boring not to do it, right? So I think if just not trying really hard is much more interesting. And you're never going to get anywhere if you don't try, right? Hope that answers.
Mobilnummeret 916-913-78. Don't you think we need to get back to some of our old trees, like more robust trees and plants, I see in the apple production and things, it's the modern trees is too skinny, too they don't survive when it's bad weather and with the animals and things. Don't you think we need to do something with our
Everything depends on where you are and what you're talking about. So I think street trees is a really interesting debate. And if I take and look at, so take the Paris region, the Bassin Parisien. It's basically a floodplain, it's a river plain. Your native trees are your poplars, your ulnas. You have Quercus rubra, a little bit higher up on ground. You have a certain amount of trees that are native. You try to put those in a street tree, they can't hack it. They can't do it because that's not their environment. So we have this contradiction between this human use and having these street trees that give us less heat sink, right? And more shade. And so how do we plant them? How do we give them more room to plant and more room? Where I think one of the things we're seeing in Paris that I absolutely love, we're just taking out cars. We're taking out whole lanes of cars and planting more. On my Eiffel Tower project that goes basically a mile long, I've taken out every car all the way along that crosses it so that we're reducing the amount of paving and more area for trees. On some places, you just can't do that. And so there's adaptive trees like Saffra japonica. It can take the heat sink. It can take this really harsh urban environment, and it's not invasive. So I think culturally, we have to understand what we can do, again, adaptive learning over time, and then what we can do now and what we can do in the future. I'm not sure new trees mean anything to me because I'm not sure what is new to some people and not to others, but understanding that there is a solid background in horticulture that has been studying plants for years. And sometimes those plants are adaptive and sometimes they just don't make any sense at all. So it's really, I don't think there's an easy answer to this.
I have another question from the people here. What if one keep the design of Martin Luther Memorial as it is, would it then, rather than changing the artist's site-specific, be a statement to let it turn into a floating ice cube, since it shares some looks with the melting North Pole? Design of site-specific adaptations, since it shares. Did you understand that?
Yeah, I understood it, and it's one person's position about showing that a very important person in American history becomes an analogy to an iceberg. I'm not sure the African American community would very appreciate that. And so it's an attitude, a social cultural attitude about one thing. And it's not, for me, paying attention to a cultural, American cultural diversity and embracing our culture. And so the site-specific of this piece, who knows who decided where that art piece was going to go, and who knows if the artist had any idea that there would be rising sea levels. I think it's about 10 years old. I'm not quite sure how old it is. I would prefer to put it on high ground and let flooding be part of our natural environment and not a political statement that is culturally could be very difficult for a lot of people.
A last question. Give us your best advice. How can we best influence the decision makers with our knowledge about sustainability? Maybe give us an example.
I think you've got to get to the kids. I think that we're not, in my opinion, we're not teaching enough in high school. We're not teaching enough in grade school. If you can get to the kids, they get to their parents. And they are the future. And I really feel that we need to be more education at a much younger age and integrating in that education, environmental education.
Thank you so much. It was
You're
an
welcome.
honor to have you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being landscape architects. Bye.
We hope to see you in Norway sometime.
Oh, I would love to come back. It's absolutely gorgeous. Yes, I'd love to come back. So we'll be there.
Thank you
We'll get
so
there.
much.
Okay, bye-bye.